headphones. Yeah, there's not much point in having headphones on when you're talking to one another. It's a bit like texting one another, isn't it?
It is. It is.
But we can hear Chloe on them for the moment.
Yeah.
So we'll just keep them here because usually the voices come booming in over, but something is amiss. A name popped up in recent days and you just immediately go, oh my God, again.
Yeah.
A guy called Herbert or Herbie Kilcline, a solicitor who's had a really colourful past and has sort of seemed to spend quite a lot of his career sailing very close to the wind when it comes to kind of crossing the line between legal representative and maybe sort of criminality.
Well, you could say he's gone from hero to villain in terms of his public profile. He certainly was, regarded as a hero for the role he played in allowing or helping Gardai bring a prosecution against Alan Wilson, a notorious gunman who was charged with the murder of Marioara Rostas.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, this week he's being jailed. Herbert Kilcline for a criminal offence, a sort of complex white-collar crime. And he's spent a long time in the papers, Herbert Kilcline, one way or another over the last
And it's not his first jail term, actually, because he previously, in 2021, was jailed for fraudulently claiming social welfare payments quite a lot. He began a jail term. Now, Kilcline is in his 60s and he is a thalidomide survivor.
Yeah.
One of the many people who suffered birth defects caused by that thalidomide drug. He go back to where he sort of comes onto the radar. He's representing an associate of Alan Wilson.
Yeah.
And a young girl called Marioara Rostas, member of the Romanian community, had been out begging on a Dublin street. She was with her brother and she had gone missing. There had been one phone call made to her brother where she had described how she was being held captive in a house. She didn't know where. She tried to read the letters of the sign on the road. She could see out a window and she goes missing without trace, presumed murdered. And really, the focus of the Garda investigation ends up sort of on Alan Wilson, a notorious hitman for hire in Dublin, who was known as the Soldier because he was sort of military in his style of work. We would come to understand a lot more about Alan Wilson in the subsequent years because there was bugging carried out in his car and we overheard some conversations, etc. he was making. But Kilcline in the background is representing an associate and a friend of Alan Wilson, who he sort of convinces to help police.
That's his own account, of course. Fergus O'Hanlon was in a relationship with Alan Wilson's sister at the time, and he claimed to have evidence about where she was buried and about what had happened on the night that she was killed. And he had... So ultimately, O'Hanlon he put himself forward out for the witness protection program, basically. And we spoke to Kilcline in the years after, and he described himself, this is his own words to the Sunday World: I was the one who convinced Alan's closest associate, Fergus O'Hanlon, to lead Gardai to the site where Marioara was buried and to give evidence against Alan Wilson. That was what allowed Gardai to charge him with Marioara's roster, a crime of which a jury acquitted him. And Alan Wilson did get charged, did get found not guilty ultimately.
And he's since he's serving a lengthy prison term.
Yeah, for an attempted
murder of
a Hutch associate.
And he was one of the hitmen for hire in that, and for other matters.
Yeah,
he's in prison. But the point about Fergus O'Hanlon was he was a really chaotic witness.
Yeah,
he was chaotic while on the witness protection program.
Yeah,
he, I think, broke ranks, came back to Dublin, visited people. He was a disaster. He was one of those people that really was unfit for the witness protection program. But nonetheless, he was, signed onto it because he did have the information, because there was nobody had any idea where Marioara Rostas was. And he did lead Gardai to her body.
Yeah.
Up in the Dublin mountains, deep in a forested woodland, and buried, wrapped in, like clinically wrapped in plastic. She was never going to be found had Fergus O'Hanlon not led Gardai to it.
Yeah.
And I actually covered the trial of Alan Wilson when he was facing the murder charge. It was one of the first times I sort of sat near him. He was very, very small, timid, a sort of a squeaky voice.
Yeah.
Not what you expect, because he had this reputation, this ferocious reputation. But O'Hanlon's evidence was chaotic during that trial, and it was before a jury.
Yeah, and of course, you see, what ultimately it came down to in court, he clearly did have information. I mean, her body was found 3 years after she disappeared in this very obscure place. So he knew, but obviously the element of reasonable doubt came into the jury's mind because, the defence clearly put it on that like O'Hanlon might have known it as a result of his own actions, effectively.
And that he was trying to frame his friend, Alan Wilson, who'd nothing to do with it.
And obviously he was taken into this, ultimately into the witness protection programme, but in the run-up he was a protected witness, and as you said, he was very chaotic. He'd give Gardai the slip. He was...
No, you're only in the witness protection programme. Everybody gets this a little bit wrong. You're only signed into the witness protection programme to give evidence at a trial, to be the witness.
Yeah.
And in the aftermath of the trial, you're signed off the witness protection programme. So you're only on it until you sit in and give your evidence, which is sometimes accepted, sometimes not. And there's been many cases where evidence hasn't been accepted. He's obviously himself mixing in criminal circles and doing chaotic things. I think he's a drug user, heavy drinker.
Yeah, I mean, there was crazy stuff like the guards, I was put him in, apartments. He'd break out and go wild, smashed up places. But he was also issuing threats randomly here and there to people while he was meant to obviously be in fear of his life and under a heavy guard of protection. Very chaotic. He was on the stand, and that clearly, he's one of a number of witnesses who are deeply embedded in the criminal underworld, whose evidence has been, I suppose, largely unsuccessful when it's come to court. But Herbert Kilcline, in the middle of all of this chaotic investigation, I suppose, he was served with a Gardai information message, which is basically a warning that there was a serious threat against his life because of his perceived role in helping this prosecution come about. He has described himself how there were shots fired at him, and clearly he was a target for people, who wanted to kill him for this role. And as a result, he did quite a lot of interviews in the media and became a well-known sort of face. And he would comment on Alan Wilson, and then even on the broader Wilson family, because obviously Eric Lucky Wilson and Keith Wilson were first cousins of Alan Wilson, both of whom are serving life for gangland murders. And so he was quite very much a hero, I suppose. He spoke about thalidomide, the impact of that scandal on him. Thalidomide was a pregnancy drug, really, wasn't it, to stop morning sickness. The tests weren't done on it properly, or they were ignored, and it led to a lot of birth defects particularly across the UK and Ireland. So he had an interesting sort of backstory. And Herbert Kilcline was very much, a lot of the people in the media would have had his number, and he was very much a hero.
And I suppose we should say as well that the scenario put forward in just going back to Marioara Rostas and her disappearance at the time, as I say, she was this Romanian girl who was living in Dublin initially. She was part of a family grouping that was removed from a roundabout out near the airport in about 2007. They were repatriated to Romania. She came back. By 2008, she was 18.
Yeah.
And she was in the country and she was begging with her brother on Pearse Street. And the scenario that O'Hanlon put forward was that Gardai knew that some driver had pulled up to her basically and spoken some words to her, offered to bring her to McDonald's. Her brother was able to tell them that. But O'Hanlon, with his solicitor Kilcline, said that driver was Alan Wilson, and that he had essentially picked her up on the side of the road and taken her to a number of locations, but had ultimately brought her to a house in Brabazon Street in Dublin 8, which was the home of his sister.
Yeah.
who has subsequently died as well, and how she was there and he sort of became super paranoid about her and shot her in the house.
Ultimately, yeah.
And the house was later burned to the ground with a lot of the evidence went with it. When it was burned to the ground, it wasn't evident the reason why.
No.
But all of that information, I suppose, unravelled a lot of the mysteries about what had happened to Marioara. And I think ultimately, while her family may have had to understand that this trial was going ahead and that the state suspect was found not guilty and ultimately acquitted, they did get her body back.
Yes.
Which could have lain forevermore in plastic bags in the Dublin mountains. And, I remember everybody being an investigation team being very disappointed when the case went the way it did. But, you were kind of going, well, you have to remember that because they have her body back and others wouldn't have. And I think the body was repatriated to Romania with help from the Irish state, and some money was raised. And it was a terribly sad story.
Oh, it was brutal. I mean, really
was.
Savage death of a very, very young girl. I mean, one of those truly shocking murders. Not that any murder has a point, but an absolutely pointless and savage killing.
Yeah.
I mean, O'Hanlon gave evidence. He was, I suppose, at times evasive and at times combative in the stand. And of course, his own culpability was always highlighted by the defence because he described driving the body up to the Dublin mountains, he claimed, with Alan Wilson, and he said he did it as a result of being in fear, and he was damned if he did. I think it was damned if you do and damned if you don't was described. But the jury's, tradition would show, or experience would show you that they look sketchily on people that have a personal involvement in crime and are giving evidence on somebody else. It's, can it be taken as...
Well, a jury didn't accept it. I mean,
yes.
In more recent times, that case would have been held before the Special Criminal Court. There was, 2 crime scenes identified by O'Hanlon, which were found to be that burnt down house in Brabazon Street in Dublin 8, where a 10-day forensic examination took place. And there was evidence gathered of shots having been fired there, which would have kind of stood up what he was saying.
Sure.
As such. And also the second crime scene being that one up in the Dublin was it Kapur Forest?
Kapur was, yeah.
In 2012. It was so remote, and there was obviously the body was found in this sort of fetal position, wrapped in these plastic bounds with duct tape, and that was evidence as well, and all of that. So what possibly might have been a clearer case, before the Special Criminal Court came a little bit earlier than those cases were going before the Special Criminal Court, because Alan Wilson later would be brought directly to the Special Criminal Court and tried as a gangland criminal and a sort of a member of a wider criminal organisation.
Yeah.
Kilcline, anyway, who we're here to talk about, so he goes on and he has built up his relationship, I suppose, with the media, and he's seen as a very valued member of society behind this attempt, certainly, to bring somebody to justice for Marioara Rostas's murder. But he then suddenly finds himself, there was always whispers going around about Herbert Kilcline. He wasn't your regular solicitor. There was something just a little bit tricky about him.
Yeah, I mean, if you describe the regular solicitor to people who are lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on your perspective, not to have to deal with them, but generally, if you're a member of the media and you're trying to contact solicitors, they're generally remarkably unhelpful.
Well, many
I would
of them,
say, Now, not all of them.
Yeah.
And, there's different types, but a lot of them are very much not going to talk to the media, not do anything, never discuss anything. And he was very much the opposite. So by 2001, he is before the courts in Dublin, charged and found guilty. I think he pleaded on this, actually. 2021. Is it?
2021, sorry. What did I say?
2001, I thought.
I'm going backwards.
Yeah.
You know me with numbers.
But hopefully now I haven't corrected you incorrectly.
Oh, you have. No, you have. Yeah. Just haven't got my glasses on. But anyway, 2021, he's before the courts and he pleads on this social welfare payment scam. And the money involved was over 120,000. He's 60 years old after that. And the fraud came to light, in he told Gardai afterwards that he thought he was entitled to the payments because he had been excluded from this compensation payouts to victims of this thalidomide drug. And he had then paid the money back in full. And he's quoted during that case as telling Gardai that I admit it was wrong, no matter how aggrieved I felt, it wasn't the right way to deal with my grievance. So he spoke to cops at the time about these deformities that he had in his hands due to his mother taking this anti-nausea drug. But he was nonetheless sentenced to a 3-year sentence with the final 1 year and 3 months suspended. Okay, so we don't need to go into any further details of the case, but clearly the judge saw a reason to actually jail him for this.
Yeah.
Now, as he's going to jail, then he starts to get worried.
Yeah.
Because he's going into jail, and you have some of the Wilsons certainly, and I can't remember, would Alan Wilson have been in jail, possibly in custody, awaiting trials at that point. So he's starting to get a bit worried that he might have spoken up a bit too much against these Wilsons and their associates, because he might have to share some roof with them.
Yeah.
So, that becomes a story in itself. Now, in recent days, he has racked up another conviction.
Yes. So it's as a lot of these white-collar crimes are quite complex and beyond the brains of your normal Crime World reporters. But
speak for yourself.
But basically, it's to do with the registration of two houses. And what has happened is he's falsified these registrations, inserted them in the registry, and then effectively collected money on the basis of collecting rent, more or less facilitating somebody else and collecting up to €250,000. So it's a big amount of money. Interestingly, when he's in court, in his defence, his defence barrister said his client, which is I think one of the first times I've heard this said, he says Kilcline acted as a covert human intelligence source for Gardai at one stage, and he previously received a formal notification of a threat to his life, and Gardai uncovered 2 separate conspiracies to murder him.
Just go back to that for a second.
Yes.
So they have said that he was, CHIS, that is. The CHIS system was set up in the aftermath of some sort of guard scandals within the Gardai, and it was set up as a system to formalise touts, as people call them, or informers or whatever.
So, I mean, it's covert human intelligence sources. So that's the CHIS.
But the CHIS system, unlike the previous system, meant that people had to be signed on the books. They had to be handled by somebody who wasn't their direct contact.
Oh, I mean, it was set up basically because guards used to have, say, the local drug dealer, and they get a bit of info off him. And, there was always a perception, rightly or wrongly, and, not going back into it, that, if you have a tout in the local area, you might do him a favour. And CHIS was a way to get past that, because instead of somebody registering with the local guard that they know, they registered this central body who would be the only people who would deal with him. He'd be formally registered, and they get formal payments, don't they?
They get paid,
Yeah, they get paid. And, the information only goes to them, only goes to the CHIS operators, who then send it on to the local units who are investigating crimes, basically.
So this information has come to light from his own legal team, presumably, because there's no way that the state would reveal somebody on CHIS.
No, definitely not.
It's come from himself.
It's come from himself.
And his Garda information message is coming from that time that he was outspoken about Alan Wilson and that he was worried about him. I think he did at one point say that a bullet he was shot at or something.
Yes.
They missed him and stuff like that. So there was definitely a real and genuine threat there.
100%.
And in actual fact, he wasn't alone.
No.
I mean, in the case of Alan Wilson, you could join a queue.
Yeah.
Because Alan Wilson was very quick to issue threats against people, both within his world and outside it.
Yeah.
And had no issue issuing threats against journalists and members of the Gardaí.
Exactly, which is quite rare.
It is.
Yeah.
And some would say stupid.
Yeah.
But so he has put that forward himself.
He's put that forward.
That he was official CHIS. What has he got to lose, I suppose?
Well, he's got very little to lose, and I suppose this is
throwing it into the mix might provide him with more security, more levels of security within the prison system.
No doubt. And also it's mitigation, I suppose. You know, his mitigation is that he's lived a law-abiding life. And he also, while accepts the actions in terms of the registering the properties, he doesn't accept fully the motivation. Obviously, the motivation the prosecution has given is the benefit financially. He's saying it's more, Kilcline describes it more as a matter of carelessness and sloppiness, I suppose.
And is there no reference to that earlier conviction for the social welfare fraud? Because, of course, he could have appealed and had that overturned in the meantime. Yeah,
there's no reference to it. There's no reference to it at that point. It's obviously there's a lot amount of copy and a lot of background on him, but no, it doesn't get into that.
So he is back in jail.
He's back in jail, he's back in jail, and it's obviously is there are a number of prisoners in the prison system. We've spoken about this before, who'd be very much protected. There are a number of ex-Gardai, for example, behind bars for various offences. Some of them, John Spud Murphy, for example, will be well known, but there's other Gardai serving sentences for domestic violence and crimes of that type. There's obviously then prisoners of the like of Jonathan Dowdall. So there are groups of people that would be protected within the prison system to a very high level and kept very much apart from the normal, I suppose, criminal population. You know, obviously everybody being in prison is a criminal, but...
Well, he says to me like he's a book on him, and maybe if he's in prison and he's trying to look to fill his time, it might be an idea to start scribbling.
Yeah, he's been up and around from hero to zero, I suppose you used to say. But yeah, it's been a turbulent life.
I'm certainly sure he's interesting stories to tell.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.